My name is Byron Mulligan, and this is my story of how I came to Christ. My birth was very difficult, and I was clinically dead for almost 8 minutes. I was born breech, and my right arm was wrapped around my neck, and my umbilical cord was wrapped around my arm and my neck, and I was in a really bad state when I was born, and that made it very difficult for obviously my mum and our connection. I recall distinct discomfort, I recall distinct pain, I recall distinct awareness of trauma, all of those senses which our senses and nervous system are well and truly online and able to sense, but without, of course, the mental or the cognitive capacity to deflect those experiences or to make sense of them or to compartmentalise. And for much of that time in the womb, I experienced quite severe psychic and spiritual attack. And that I knew it to be that. It felt quite unnatural, and it felt very threatening and extremely frightening. A distracted state where I'd really been pulled apart and pulled at a little bit. I found myself quite isolated, and my sense of isolation and just being alone was really there right from the start as well. I would describe my upbringing or my childhood home as quite godless, in the sense that there was no God. There was no spirituality, there was no religion, there was no anything like that. We never referred to God, we were never referred to anything really of a non-physical nature. That was not a part of my home or family. But right from day one, that was very much a part of me, and I felt like all of my extrasensory senses and my awareness all came through quite intact. And so without any of that support, I spent a lot of time as a young child on my own, trying to sort through some of these experiences and having these experiences, feeling quite scared and feeling quite isolated from them. I spent many, many nights as a young child lying in bed wide awake, seeing all sorts of things in my room, feeling and sensing all sorts of things around me, having horrific nightmares. But something happened at 8, and everything went off, like the master switch went off. And everything went dark, like darker than it was, but it was dark, dark. And it felt like this black thing just came over me and kind of wrapped up and held me and kept me there. And the more I tried to resist, the more it provided perfect resistance again. It felt like a toxic padded cell that was against you in all sides, and that every time you pushed it, it just pushed back, and if you pushed harder, it would push harder. And so it just kind of kept you trapped. It was this feeling of just being trapped. And by the age of 10, had developed what was clinically diagnosed as major depressive disorder. My mum and dad were absolutely at their wits' end by the time I had reached the age of 10 and didn't know what to do. They recognised that I was experiencing some really heavy and intense internal experiences that I wasn't sharing and that they really didn't understand. So at that young age, they did all they knew really how to do and send me to a psychiatrist. Really aware at the age of 10 that if I was to share any of these experiences going on, that wasn't going to go well for me. So even at that age, I put on a bit of a story and said, look, just going through kids stuff, can't make friends. I was very suicidal. I wasn't able to connect with anyone. I hadn't really lost connection with any friends who had gone off to then do other stuff with their friends, and was really very isolated in this experience of a psychic and spiritually rich world that was as real as anything to me, but I couldn't share. And that it was a very psychically dark world. It was a very black world. It wasn't a positive, light, spiritual, happy place. It was a very dark and very unsafe psychic environment. My interests quite naturally found themselves in the occult section and starting to move into the black arts and dark magic and Satanism and the occult and all of those types of things. And I remember even in primary school spending all of my breaks in the primary school library in what they would have called the little paranormal section, reading everything from ghosts and vampires and whatever I could find. And so in a very natural state and feeling isolated, I really jumped quite headlong into that area of exploration and research, and as a young child became quite competent and quite knowledgeable in all areas of occult, all areas of metaphysics, all areas of that area of earth magic and spirituality and ritual and ceremony, and proceeded over the next few years to explore that even more deeply with others and in group settings, and spent a lot of time in shamanic circles, druidic circles, ceremonial magic, spent time working in satanic circles, in Wiccan circles. I was not doing well in my life and was really struggling just socially and personally, on top of all of this experience and trying to work all of this stuff out. By the time I got to high school, I was 13 and was really hoping that with a new environment and with new people and just a new kind of start, that some of this would change or something new would intervene, but it really just progressively got worse and worse. In grade 9, I had collapsed twice at school, from nervous tension, I think, from exhaustion. I just passed out and was picked up at school, and it was stress, it was anxiety. I was starting to spend less and less time at school and just more and more time away. Found weed, found drugs, found people, unruly people that seemed far more interesting. So I was starting to get into trouble in my life as well. And so it was in grade 10, I wasn't even 15 yet, and I was hardly spending any time there anyway and was in a terrible state. I remember getting my timetable for the year and for the term, and taking one look at it and just walking straight off the school grounds and saying, I can't do another moment of this. Continued on for the next few years, living on the street, getting into trouble, taking drugs, just doing crime, doing all of that sort of stuff, while trying to maintain this deepening level of psychic awareness and spiritual awareness, which was quite sincere, but without any support or direction. It was just creating havoc in my life. And every area I tried to explore independently, I needed guidance, I needed a primer, I needed some sort of guide, and without that, I found myself just getting more and more muddled in it, to a point where I was really just at the end and was extremely suicidal. Sometime in the day or two before that, I had hit the wall and I'd broken all 4 of my fingers on my hand, and it was more relieving than I had felt before that. It was just self-harm, it was self-mutilation for the purpose of relief, as was everything I think that I was doing, because anything physical in pain was more relieving than the psychic experience. I was lying in bed one night and it was pitch black and my hand was aching and I could feel everything around me, and I was really just at my worst. And a force hit my chest, and it was like an elephant just fell from the sky and just went bang on my chest as I was lying down. And it hit me so hard, the force hit me so hard that I went to gasp and nothing came out, and tears came up and flew up out of my eyes. It was like I got pushed out and I watched tears fly up out of my eyes. The force was something else, and it stayed there and I couldn't speak, and I was pinned for the longest time. Now, until this time, I didn't know about Jesus. Jesus was not part of my life. Religion was not part of my life. The Bible was not part of my life. None of that. I didn't know about any of those things. I knew a lot about spirituality. I'd maybe learnt about some ascended masters or beings of light. Jesus was not on my table at all. But I knew it was Jesus. The weight of it carried the name. It carried the energy. The introduction was very, very clear. And it was after that time, it was after that experience, I would say almost immediately, that what had happened 9 years before, when the light switch went out, when the core switch went off and everything went dark, it came back on again. The light switch came back on again. And it took a long time. It took 2 or 3 years for the full-time darkness to cycle out again. and it would move in bouts and in cycles. But from that time, light broke through, and the clouds just started to disperse enough to show that there was light behind them, and that's what I wanted. It was the strangest force in my life. It would be reasonable to think that the force had some conscious intent or evil intent about it, and that it would only take Christ to release its hold of me. Whether that is true or not, I don't know, but it took Jesus to release it and to break it. Then the light work started to come through, learning more about healing, learning more about the Ascended Masters, learning more about beings of light, learning more about the light grid around the planet, all of the lighter work of spirituality, moving out of kind of the heavier, thicker psychic stuff and moving into that higher frequency of spirituality, which had been around me forever, but I just hadn't seen it because all I saw was black. And so with that foundation of research and knowing a fair bit about the field, I continued on, but in a far more joyous way and a happier way, and my spirituality then became a real positive. And while Jesus never made a reappearance, and nothing related to Jesus or Christ or anything of that sort ever really came back after that, it was Jesus that did it, and that really enabled me to come back to myself and brought my life back to me. Then suddenly I'm in my 20s and doing normal stuff, but with this incredible spiritual background and spiritual knowledge and experience at the same time. And it was at that time that I met my first wife Tanya, and we met when we were both in our early 20s. And it wasn't too long after that we decided to travel, and that we needed to start seeing a bit more of our life before we did other things and family stuff. So we packed up our lives and we jumped in a van and travelled around Australia for almost 12 months, which was an incredible experience for so many reasons. Incredible for growth and again for that spiritual learning and meeting new people, and it was an incredible time. And that got us to Queensland, and we arrived in Queensland in 2005. Not really planning to move anywhere. We'd allowed a year to travel and then to come back and then to maybe start a more stable life. Our starting point in Queensland was very different. Tanya got work very early and was starting to work very early, and so was then in employment. I had a really hard time finding work for whatever reason, and so for quite a while I had a lot more time up my sleeve. And we arrived right at the start of summer, which is a very exciting time climate-wise in Queensland. All the storms are coming in and the ground's green, and I'd never experienced a subtropical environment. It was extremely activating and stimulating. And so with time on my hands, I went exploring, I went running, I hit bush, I went exploring the environments. I found myself in the natural environment a lot more, and getting to know where I was. And it was that really initiated what I would call my spiritual awakening time, my classic spiritual awakening phase. And it started from the land. It was the land that initiated the process. It was coming to Queensland and being part of the climate, the geography, just the energy of this physical environment. It had to start here, which is why we came here. My energy centres, my chakras were going nuts. I could feel the geometry and the form in my system moving and changing and transforming. All sorts of internal experiences were happening, and I could feel myself coming alive and starting to awaken. All the while at that time, my partner was going to work every day. So for the first year, our experiences really kind of sent us in a very different trajectory. And again, a lot of these experiences for me, while this time very healthy and positive, was still very hard to describe and very hard to convey to other people. So again, I found this experience a little bit isolating, and the more I started to share what was going on for others, I didn't have anyone in my life who had gone through a major spiritual awakening. And so no one could really guide me through that and say, yep, this freaking out is normal. These random experiences, that's normal. Yep, the what the fucks, that's totally normal. I was connecting to the center of the earth. I was connecting to deep space. I was connecting to things and places and dimensions, physical and otherwise, that were all new. And it was expansion at like this atomic rate. And it was both wonderful and terrifying. Not terrifying in the sense of threat, but terrifying as in upside down, inside out. What is going on? This experience started to deepen more and more, and more of my system started coming online. It was like there was this giant switchboard on the inside of me with 15 operators, all just rewiring things, putting in new plugs, moving circuits, flicking switches. They're all talking to people, listening to directives. I felt like I had a team of people working on me 24 hours a day, just operating, working, moving, rewiring. It was new and I didn't have anyone to bounce that off. So again, my learning was very much on my own, and as that began to deepen, again, the anxiety around that, sense of bliss that came with it as well. The paradox of that was just so unusual, to have such fear and such joy at the same time, and a joy and fear not really based on anything. It was around year 3 or 4, after that initial experience, that death came. And for almost 12 months, everywhere I looked was death. And for the first time in that experience, I realised that a part of me was dying, that maybe I was dying, or that maybe I was going to die, that the transformation that I was feeling holy. It was feeling complete. It wasn't just feeling like a little transition in life. It was big. Something really big was happening in my system. And now all I'm seeing is death and reminders of death. I'm driving to work and there's horrific accidents on the side of the road. I'd turn on the television and someone's getting their head pulled off. Gore, blood, all of it. Everywhere I turned, I was being drowned in it. And just the feeling of it just increased the anxiety. I really got into a place in my mind thinking that something was going to happen. I think I'm going to die. I think something's going to happen. And it was unusual in that time, because for my entire life, I've always in my mind been able to look to the future. You might say, can you imagine what you're doing this afternoon? And I can imagine it in my mind, where I'm going to be and what I'm going to do. You might say, can you imagine yourself as an old man? And I could imagine myself as an old person sitting on my porch, and I could visualise it. Most people can do that, it's not a weird skill. But it was during this time that's part of this internal change, part of this change within my system, knocked that out. And now on the inside, when I went into the future, when I moved in my mind to try and look forward, it stopped. It exploded in light, like the monitors that you see in an operating theatre. That beep, beep, beep. That was it. It's like my life just continued on for a bit and then stopped. We're now at around 2010, and things are getting very scary, and at this point I can't see a future for myself. Literally, not metaphorically. I can't even muster a vision. I can't even manufacture one to make up. My mind simply won't create a picture that I can sense as my future. There's nothing. And that brought up a lot of fear and a lot of anxiety. And so we arrive in 2014, and I remember on my birthday, 24th of February 2014, thinking, here we go, this is the year, something's going to happen this year. I don't know what, but it's whatever's going to come after it. If anything's going to come after it, it doesn't reflect anything before. Something big is happening. And it was. I was called on a particular day to get in my car and drive. And at this time I was living in Western Australia. and I'd been called back to Western Australia from Queensland, and Spirit said, you need to get in your car and you need to go that way. And I went to grab stuff and I was almost physically thrown out the door. You need to get in your car now and you need to go that way. And so I got in my car and I started driving, and I didn't have a thing with me. I had my phone, but I didn't bring anything. And so I'm driving and my physical body has taken over at this point. And I don't know where I'm going. And I'm about 4 hours north by now, and I'm still driving, and I don't know where I'm going, but I'm going north. And I arrive at a place called the Pinnacles, which is several hours north of Perth. And the Pinnacles is a desert of petrified trees. They're like stones, monuments, stone monuments, limestone, sandstone monuments. But it was an ancient forest that has petrified, that's now all but disappeared as trees, and now it's just this sea of like these stone monuments. It's a beautiful, powerful, amazing place. And for whatever reason, that's where the car went. That's where we were going. And so we drove into this desert. I drove into this desert area and stopped the car, and there wasn't a soul around, and it was perfectly quiet. And I just sat there, and I had no idea what I was doing. No guidance, no nothing. It's late in the afternoon by now. And I just sat there, and the sun went down, and I'm still sitting. I don't know what I'm doing there. It's dark now, still sitting, and I start to fall asleep because I don't know, I'm starting to fall asleep. Anyway, I wake up at some point, I'm not sure, I'm a bit disorientated, and I can hear this hum. It's like a microwave hum, like that sort of radiation hum, and it's coming from a couple of 100 metres away. And I get out of my car. It's a fairly bright moon, so I can see, but it's the middle of the night. And so I start to walk towards this hum, and just through the sea of these boulders and stones. And so I'm walking over the desert hills, and I finally see this really tall one. It's probably 12 or 13 feet tall, which is a pretty big one. And it's humming, like it's radiating, like it's being turned on, like a machine turned on. And of all of these things in the middle of the night, I can hear this one boulder just humming away. And so I start to walk towards it, and it's audibly humming, like you could physically hear it humming. And so I stand there for a while, a couple of metres away from it, just wondering what to do. And nothing happens, like it doesn't do anything, but I feel compelled to walk up to touch it. And so I walk up to touch it, and I get about a foot away, and the energy of it, I don't know what it is, pulls me into the rock, and I hit my head on the rock, and I pass out. Like right up. Nothing grabs me, it was just the field, the gravity of it pulls me straight in, like face first into the rock, and I hit the rock and I pass out. And I wake up the next morning, I don't know what time it is, but the sun's just coming up, so it's kind of light. And it's quiet. The internal experience that had been getting me to that point, that had just been chaos, had turned off. It had gone quiet. The day was normal, the rock was quiet, it had gone quiet. Everything had gone quiet. It was the strangest experience. And I sat there, and that was it. And from that moment, the relentless barrage of psychic assault and energetic assault and learning and all of this that was just done. And the peace. Because everything went quiet all the way through. And I hadn't experienced that for a long time, you know. I knew that I was different. And so I moved back to Queensland and restarted a life of significantly more peace. Not much more clarity in terms of purpose. I still had no idea what I was doing, but I felt a lot stronger in myself. And I knew that whatever had been going for that entire period that started in 2005, 2006, had finished, like right on the line. It was the strangest thing. And so again, proceeding with my life, starting to get normal again, moving as we do. Around 6 months into my normal life, I had a very strange calling, and it was to move to Bali. And so by the end of that year, I'd moved to Bali, and I spent around 8 months living in Bali, which was the most wonderful experience, and what I would call again further initiatory experience. My time on the island was incredibly healing, incredibly transformative, and only further building my trajectory towards God. I spent most of my days with Ram Dass and listening to Ram Dass audio, listening to really anything I could get my hands on, Alan Watts cycling away. So I spent my time in contemplation and in deep reflection with God while I was there in a healing space. And it was beautiful. It was a wonderful experience. And it was while I was there that I came into contact with an old friend who I'd met on Facebook, whose name was Dana, who lived in America. And we'd known each other for quite some time and been very good friends online for a very long time. And it was only at this time while I was in Bali that we both made a connection and saw the potential of a relationship. Dropped into a partnership and family space very quickly and very easily and very effortlessly, because it was very apparent to both of us that this was our life now. Both of us had come from very different backgrounds, mine largely spirituality and hers largely religious. Dana had grown up in the Bible Belt of East Texas, so powerfully religious, powerfully Christian, biblically oriented community, which she was not a part of. She was very much a spiritual person and with a deep awareness and sense of God and Christ in her heart, but did not resonate with the church or any of that she had seen around her community, especially in the Bible Belt where it's quite thick and a little bit bent. And so it wasn't long after we met that she mentioned to me and asked me the question, had I ever heard of A Course in Miracles? And I had heard of A Course in Miracles, this resource that had been around since the 70s, but I guess due to the things that I had experienced as a very young child and my learning and research path starting very early, there were a lot of resources that I just considered elementary. I considered them a bit 101. And so I'd really ignored it, because right from the start I found myself in the complicated stuff, in the really complex aspects of spirituality. But now the older I was getting, the more simple stuff was starting to come through. And so A Course in Miracles was presented, and she'd never read it or heard it. And so we were driving in the car and we found an audio copy on YouTube, and we just started playing it while we were driving. And that was it. I've never experienced a more impactful resource in my life. From the moment that I started listening to it, it just started transforming me from the ears in. It was everything that I knew in spirituality from the holy place of light. And I hadn't experienced a lot of light in my life until Jesus came through. And then I recognised that light, and while my life was not wholly that, I knew it and I wanted it, and I knew that's what I was. For me, A Course in Miracles was pure Christ. It is the light of Christ. It is God without the trap, without the casings, without the veils and the box and all of the locks and stuff. And so really for the first time, I would say God as God started to make an appearance into my life, and Jesus as Jesus walked right through the front door, and as Jesus and as Christ. And so that learning started me on a very different trajectory again, and for the first time, seriously and humbly, I was starting to consider Christianity, starting to consider the Bible and the places where Christ had been the whole time. Now, for 20 years or more, I of course had been aware of the Bible and had tried many times to to read the Bible, not realising that it's not a book. It's not a book, it's not a classic book in any way, shape or form. And that without a guide, without a primer, or someone to show you how to read the Bible, where do you start a book? Page 1, word 1. That's where you start a book. And so that's where I started the Bible. Page 1, Old Testament. I don't think I ever got past a few paragraphs before closing. No, this is not for me. And a few years would pass and I would recognise people still referring to God and Jesus. It's in the Bible. I've got to be missing something. So I'd pick it up again. Page 1, chapter 1. Nope. I'd try again a few years later. I'm just going to go somewhere in the middle. Maybe I'm starting at the wrong spot. Nobody told me that the Old Testament is 3/4 of the entire Bible. No matter where I turned to, I still got to the Old Testament. It was still the same God I was reading about. Nope. And I gave up. Not realising what I was looking for was the New Testament. And no one told me that. And so now, at the age of 41, I'm reading the Bible and someone says to me, stop. Let me show you. You need to start here. You need to start in the New Testament, right at the back. And may I suggest, start with John, just as a suggestion. No one had ever guided me so wonderfully and so specifically. And so that's what I did. And so the next step logically after finding the Bible for the first time at age 41 and realising, yes, okay, that is it, maybe it's time to go to church. I'd never been to church in 41 years, that's not true. I'd been to church once as a child in primary school. We went for a Christmas service as a class, and I recall it being the most boring thing. I couldn't wait to get out of there. None of that was for me. A billion people can't be wrong. Maybe I just need to find the right church. Back onto Google. Knowing now, getting a feeling for Christ as I am beginning to know Christ, beginning to recognise Christianity and the religion in its scope and breadth, knowing that various denominations exist within Christianity and they can be radically different, and starting to recognise where in the pool of Christianity I might find an entry that's a bit more suitable to me. And so I got on Google and started feeling for churches around my area, and took a little while, but found a church in a suburb not too far away from me, a suburb with I think over 10 churches in it, so could be any suburb, any church, anywhere at all in southeast Queensland. And on a random Sunday morning I just decided to go to see what it was like, and just to get a feel, and to feel if Christ still existed in it. Well, I pick a random church of more than 10 churches in a random suburb. It happens to be a large church, and I can tell you that I got there right on time, and there were people out the foyer. There were hundreds of people at any church in a random suburb. It was packed, and not just older people, there were younger people, there were families, and it didn't take long to realise that everyone in this church, they're lifers. They've been there every week. They all know each other. No one's new. Like, this isn't a random occurrence. This is a thriving community in this one church alone. I was blown away. It completely took my breath away to feel this was church. It was exactly what my heart wanted and that my head couldn't believe was still happening. It felt wonderful. The people there were so welcoming. They knew that I was new because everyone there was familiar, like I was new. It was just a wonderful experience. And while I did get to the end of that service feeling that I probably wasn't compelled to continue to go to church, it was a wonderfully refreshing experience to recognise that Christ is alive and well in the hearts of people, albeit in traditional Christianity and biblical Christianity, but it is alive and well in the community, and people are connecting and doing things and meeting in Christ's name, and it's not just something that you do at home and you don't talk about, and it's not really cool anymore. It was thriving, and it was wonderful to see that. And it was very encouraging for me, having only found Christ very recently in my life, that there is this active and enriched world to still move into. And it wasn't kind of a shadow thing post-spirituality. So that was really refreshing and really nice to find, and made me feel a lot more confident in my deepening relationship to Jesus as I was coming to know Jesus and Christ. For the first time, I think, in my life, my spirituality became wholly God-centric. And that's very different to mainstream spirituality, or any form of spirituality that doesn't have God in it. Before this time, I reflect and realise that I was the top of my spiritual tree without really naming myself. Without God, I was God. I was the creator of my life. I was the manifester. I was doing stuff. I was juggling everything in the air. If something did or didn't happen, it was me. I realised that everything had come down to me in my spirituality. If anyone was healed, it was me that did it. If anything happened, I could take credit for it. All of that, you know. And it became apparent to me, as God kind of opens your eyes and you become more aware of something greater than you that is real, that you are not first, that you are in place and in life, that you are not in charge of life. And it's a real eye-opener to the mind when you get shuffled back into your rightful place, which is in with everything else and not at the top of everything else. It's a wonderful experience, and it puts God at the centre of all things, of which you're just a part of all of those things, and you are not the centre of all things. It's such a different orientation, and I wholly attribute Course in Miracles for allowing me to become aware of and remember that orientation, which is natural. It's the natural orientation, because things move better, because something is bigger than you, and we must always remember this. It's very difficult to talk about God in the sense of Jesus and God to people who are dedicated spiritual, because all they hear is religion, all they hear is church. And so you talk about Jesus and you don't bring Jesus through from the holy heart. It's like you're talking about the Bible, and it's very hard to get Jesus out of that. And so all of the circles that I knew and was highly competent in, suddenly I couldn't really hit the mark with anyone, because now I was religious. And no. And so I explored religion. No, I'm way too spiritual for religion. Religion wasn't interested in me either. And with this burning passion for Jesus and for God still going crazy in my system, I really found it quite distressing not knowing what to do, because I couldn't find a place to land with it. I couldn't go to church because I didn't feel at home there. Nothing that I was speaking of in my relationship to Christ related to the Jesus of the Bible. But I was really into Jesus, and Jesus doesn't live in spirituality in any form. And it genuinely became quite distressing, and again more isolating, in the way that I couldn't find someone smack in the middle whose heart spoke of God and whose heart spoke of Christ, but not with the frame. That's a very unique position, I found out sort of the hard way. And the more I reached out to people, both from spiritual or religious perspectives, the more I found that I was getting shut down and becoming more isolated in my experience, because it was going to hit a wall either way with either party. And so prayer was very new in my life, and I'd certainly never prayed with anyone else. And I found this one night in this state of discomfort and a bit of kind of agitation, asking Dana if she would sit with me in a state of communion in prayer with God before we went to sleep. And she said, yes, of course. And so we both closed our eyes and went quiet. And it's funny because we stayed quiet, not realising that neither of us had said how we would do it. And that whether we just prayed silently or whether someone would say something, like we hadn't actually said anything, we just sort of dropped into the space, and then realised a few seconds later we both opened our eyes waiting for the other person. And so that was it was funny that it was a bit of a false start. And so I agreed to start. And I'd never said a prayer out loud in my life. I'd never prayed. really. I never said anything articulate. So I didn't know what to say. And so I just went quiet and I listened for whatever came through. And it was simple. The words that came through were, "Dear God, it is us. Thank you for everything. Amen." And that was all that it was. And it was complete. It was a whole prayer and a complete prayer. And it surprised even me, the words that came out, and that they were beautiful and simple and full. It was contained. It was a contained statement. And there was so much more, but it was complete, and that was it. And the thing that struck me when I said that was, "Dear God, it is us," because of course I meant Dana and I, like, "Dear God, it is us. Thank you for everything." And no matter what it is that I would have said, "Thank you for everything" was it. It's like the aho, and there was no more. And from that moment on, that has always been my prayer. That became my prayer. And so that's what it was. And so we just sat in it, in the quietness of that and the fullness of it, just feeling the words that had just come through, because they were right and they were good. And we let that settle for a moment. And then Dana spoke. And the moment that she spoke, it was like the light of heaven opened and shone through her. And I didn't hear a word she said, because it wasn't about the words. The light of Christ, through her presence of prayer, shone over her words, and through her words onto mine and back onto mine that had just been spoken. And it was like an atomic bomb went off in my mind. My system, I just closed my eyes, and it wasn't anything that she said. I don't know what she said. It was in the act of her expression that this boom, and her light hit my words, and in particular, it hit the line, "It is us." And a vision came, and a revelation came, and I dropped out and I watched. And as I inside opened my eyes, I was elevated, and I looked, and it was dark and it was hot, and there were people below me, and I was disoriented. And as I started to open my eyes, I realised that I was on the cross, and I was looking at people below me, and I was looking through Jesus' eyes. And the feeling, I could feel every human being on the face of the earth. They were all me, and I was them. I am the human, the divine template of all of man, and every single person on the planet and I were one in that moment. And it's like the cross acted like a mobile phone, and that I was on the phone, and the Holy Spirit was the Wi-Fi, the signal, and that just in this moment, these words poured out of my mouth. And the words were in a cry, "Father, why have you forsaken us?" Now that isn't the line that Jesus spoke. That's one of the incorrect lines associated. But the line was used in the vision on purpose, because it wasn't me or Jesus that spoke it. It was like on the cross, in this one window of time, of all of time, this window opened. And in this one moment, this line happened that opened and connected to God. And for this one moment, there was an open line between earth and heaven. One moment where one thing could be said, one thing for God to hear. And all of humanity, 8 billion people, as one person, one mouthpiece, with one moment, one thing, you get one thing to say. If your humanity, all of humanity in all of our lostness and our wretchedness and all in our pain, every human being's heart, if that was one heart and you had one moment to say one thing to God, what would it be? Where are you? I'm lost. We're scared. Where are you? Why have you forsaken us? Why have you left us? And that makes we. But there's a more powerful word than we, and that is us. And we turns into us when we agree on something, when you and I are united in purpose, in agreement, when we are in covenant, when we are united in Christ. That is the one us. When 2 or more in my name, that's us ship. But it felt like it went forever, and I couldn't speak for the longest time. And Dana was still speaking her prayer as she was watching me exploding before her eyes that something was happening via her words. And it took the longest time for us to reflect back on all of that together, and the power of that, and that the revelation itself came from the request of unity that we pray together, that 2 or more pray in our name, in Jesus' name, that we'd never done that before, that I'd never prayed and Dana had really not prayed, but when 2 or more meet in Christ's name. The image then moved and finished with a final picture of Jesus' face, and it was in the form of a jigsaw. And so it's like an image of the face of Jesus in 8.5 billion pieces. And you could see that each piece was a person, each piece was an individual man on the planet. And there were a few pieces missing in the vision, just a couple of pieces missing. So you could easily see that it was Jesus' face, but a few pieces of the jigsaw were missing. And every time a piece went in, the face formed and it became more alive and more real. But it was the last piece. It was the last piece that was the key. The last piece changed everything. And the minute the last piece went into the face to make the face complete, the face changed. And it turned into the Son. It turned into Christ. The whole face of Jesus, when every single one of us, not one of us can be left behind, every single one of us as one, united as us, is the face of Christ. The face of Christ is all of us together. Minus one, it's back to you, me, and Jesus. Jesus is us, individual, you and me, we. Us is united, the one us, and the face of the one humanity is the face of Christ. There was a melding or a unification with Jesus through this experience that just embedded in my body and became so experiential, became so first person that I feel Christ all the time. I feel Jesus' presence all the time. It was the most profound experience of my life and transformative experience of my life. The parable that I have, been shown through this and that I've begun to work with is what I would finish with in this testimony. And it is really the most important lesson that I've come to learn in my life and that I share the most with other people now. And it's the parable of the aspen tree. So the largest living organism on earth is an aspen tree. and its name is Pando, and it's a male, and it's in Utah, and it spans over 107 acres. Now, of course, Pando appears as a forest, and so you would see an aspen forest. But just beneath the surface of the dirt, there's one root system. It's not a forest, it's one organism. One organism spanning over 107 acres. What a monster. So we're talking one being, one living being, covered in dirt, with all of its individuations sticking up. And it's the dirt that creates the illusion. Because as we approach Pando, we don't see one being. We see thousands of individual beings. Now, to approach any one of those trees, is that tree Pando? Yes. Could you speak to Pando by speaking to the tree? Could Pando speak to you? Yes. It is. Is it all of Pando? No. Do you know that when you're talking to a tree? No. And then you do. And it is a groundbreaking revelation. And the only reason that we participate in the illusion of individuality over individuation is the dirt. If that dirt wasn't there, we would not see separate trees. It is only the appearance of the soil that makes Pando appear individual. But it is an illusion. The dirt is the illusion, and it is only the illusion of being too close up. When we remember that that soil is only an illusion of perception, that if we were to remove it, nothing happens except the truth would be revealed. And that what the reveal is that it is one. It is one being, and that all of these individuals were not individuals, they were individuation. Individuation is completely different. And in the same way, we are individuated as the one being. We are one organism, and you would call that organism Christ. You might say you're a hair or a finger or a whatever. We are all individuated aspects of the one being, in the same way that the aspen forest is one being, in the same way that a piece of coral is one being with millions of points of consciousness all over it. There's multiple organisms and beings in the world that operate in the same format. And so the Christ within is the holiness within. It is the spirit within all of us, but not just your spirit and my spirit, it's the spirit that we share. And when we put it like that, we recognise that there's a truth in that there is a common point in our us-ship, that there is an us united by something, even if you're not clear what it is. We are an us, and it is only in perception that we separate ourselves into a we, into a you and me, but that is an option, and it's actually not true. The kingdom of heaven is within you. Christ did not carry a book to teach people that via text. It was a direct experience of Christness within us both. When two or more meet in my name, and it only takes two to agree to meet in the name of Christ for Christ to appear. It is a collection process. The more we work together, the more Christ appears for us. And no learning and no lessons, no knowledge is required for that necessarily. It is just the commitment to God and to know that God is the centre of our life and the centre of all things.